Then we'll review the town's financial position, quarter 3, fiscal year 17, and the Board of Ed, quarter 3, fiscal year 17. Now, what I propose, as long as, Dr. Jones, you'd be ready, is that we move you to number 2, and then we do the town as number 3. Is that okay? Is that okay with everybody? Okay. All right, Brian, welcome.
Hi there. Do you have the, there should be the OPEB and the regular pension printouts?
Review first.
The one that has all the money, the regular pensions. This is the March 31st report. You see the assets on page 1 are at $360 million. And as far as the asset classes that we usually talk about, you'll see a new one midway through the page, the absolute return. That is, I guess the best way to describe it is it was a replacement for a hedge fund that is almost completely liquidated. You see the DJAM diversified strategies right above it, which has very little money in it. That was an absolute return hedge fund, meaning that they were primarily concerned with principal protection. It wasn't was never going to give outsized returns, but it was going to minimize loss. It was a stabilizer for the portfolio. Unfortunately, they were acquired by a big private equity firm and not well marketed, and they're being shut down. So this absolute return fund, return asset class here, it's called a MAC fund. It's called a multi-asset class fund. So it attempts to do sort of the same thing that the hedge fund was doing and cheaper. So made it something that we looked into. We interviewed several different managers, and Invesco was chosen. We'll see if they're supposed to be nimble. That's how they manage low volatility sort of principal preservation, so they stay in a mix of, and it's called multi-asset class, so they're allowed in all sorts of asset classes, and they actively manage based on their models, and they strictly adhere to those models. And so we'll see how it does. In Europe, some pensions in Europe are entirely that, and there's not to say that we couldn't as well. I mean, for us, this is a very small allocation. We're going to see how it does, because it does overlap a lot of because I said it has many different asset classes. So it has bonds, it has equities, it has commodities, real estate potentially. So we'll see how it does, and if it's lives up to its billing over the next few years, maybe we'll allocate more and more away from hedge funds and the other overlap asset classes. As far as anything else on the sheet, the returns, if I recall, not bad for 1 month, 0.77. Fiscal year to date, 7.31. So nothing to complain about there. We recently changed our target rate to 7%. So that's good, since that's what our 5-year return is and our 7-year return, and looks like hopefully this fiscal year's return is going to at least be that. So. Are there any questions on the main pension?
Mr. Becker?
Just with the new absolute return allocation here, are you going to rebalance, the board rebalance out? Because I see there's no target for that since it's new.
We're not,
you adjust all your targets then and include that?
So your question is, are we going to rebalance? So what we're doing is we're actually going to, tomorrow, right? Is that our meeting tomorrow? Yeah. Next week. We are adding that asset class to our IPS, but right now what I would do is it fits into the hedge, there's a hedge fund replacement, and so together they still equal to 10% roughly. So that's, I don't feel that we're out of bounds. We're actually going to put a new asset class up though. So you'll see.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And not so much rebalance, but more you'll add them formally and maybe adjust like hedge fund down to do 5 or something.
Yep.
Or Just because that line has sort of everything totals up, and then you're targeting, so in theory, you're just got to, now you have a new class. So you have some sort of plan to do that, right? I mean, it's minor. But
Yeah, hedge funds are probably going to, I think they have a band as it is, but the target will probably go to 5% since absolute return's replacing that.
Okay. Yeah, no, and I was at the meeting where you had Invesco in, and the whole logic makes a lot of sense, what they're doing in Europe, and the expense of hedge funds lately. It certainly,
That's
I
the
think it's
plan.
great direction. At
That's
least
the plan.
Try it. So, yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Becker. Any other questions? It's nice to see the return, though.
I never complain when it's a positive number. And then OPEB, much less involved, $30 million on the first page. And we have some cash there, but I believe we're rolling that into, we roll it into the allocations of the 3 asset classes. And its return is even more exciting because this fund is a little bit more equity exposed. So as long as the stock market is doing well, the OPEB will look good. And I would caution you that when that changes, it will also probably go down more than the main fund. So it is what it is until we can, we can't have other asset classes really until it gets a little bit bigger. Probably soon, though. Somewhere as we approach in the $50 million mark, we can definitely start to mimic this exactly and save some money probably.
Okay. Any questions on OPEB? Becker?
That's a good question, because I know we've talked about trying to get to a point where you mimic that. And so do we know, and maybe on your end, or maybe Bob's got it, but when that point is projected out? A couple of years, or sort of, do we have an idea?
I think actually we're going to get, well, I don't know what from a returns basis, but I think that we put significant money into it, so it's been growing rapidly. I don't know. Yeah,
Just a
Bob probably has the projection.
Ballpark. I mean, because that's a good point when we do get there, so.
Mr. Mayor, you have any off-the-cuff estimation of when we'll be close to 50 million in OPEB?
No, 2 years.
That would be
All right,
my
good
gut
enough.
too, based on watching it grow from, I remember when it was 5.
Yeah.
Not that long ago.
Perfect, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else? Have a good night. Thank you.
You too.
Okay, Dr. Jones, we're on to the Board of Ed financial position as of the third quarter.
Good evening. Yeah. Do you want to start out with or do you want to jump to this one?
Where would you like
Yep.
to start with?
I think we'll go ahead and start with the simplistic form, just because everybody seemed to like that last time and it was understandable.
Okay.
So what you're looking at is column 1 and column 2 are exactly what you saw the first time we brought this format to you in the last quarter. Columns 3 and column 4 are any updates between our last report and this report. And just a couple of things to note would be, when you look at column 3, you can look at all of the line items, those lines 1 through 17, which are projected, and you can see where we have a positive balance. If you're looking at column 4, you're seeing what is held in reserve. And I say held in reserve because, as you know, we started with that $1.2 million gap back in December. So we have held things in reserve since then, trying to make sure we keep that gap closed, and then also being in the spring now, not really knowing what's happening at the state level. Again, we're trying to keep the gap closed and also be as conservative as possible. So the items in that column 4 on the top are those items that are frozen. So if you look at even the instructional office on line 7, you'll see that there's more being held now than there even was at the last quarter. And if you look at maintenance, that has stayed at that $225,000, and those are just projects that we're not doing right now. Then if you look at the technology, again, that number has gone up a little bit, and because we have frozen a little bit more in that area as well. So where that puts us, when you get down to the bottom and you're looking at the deficit in the red, you can see all of those areas where our expenses are higher than they were anticipated. And by the time this is all, we have our positive and then our reductions as well. Down on the bottom, it would leave us at the end of the year, and again, as of this quarter projection, at $523,000. Again, we're trying to be very conservative here because we still have $810,000 outstanding to come from the state. Now, we are very hopeful that we will get that funding, but we are watching the state level, I think, just like everybody else, and are very mindful that we need to be prepared should something not come our way that we're expecting out of that $810,000. So, and did you have anything you would like to add? No? Okay. Sure.
So in fiscal year 16, which we're executing now, we're still waiting for $810,000 from the state. And if we do get it, then the projected balance will be 523. If we don't, obviously we'll be negative 200 and some odd, right?
That's correct.
And that's, and just for everyone who's not looking at this piece of paper, that is on top of the fact that you have taken $1 million projected and frozen it as a buffer for the end of the year.
Yes, I mean, we've been freezing since December. So, and this number, again, this is a projection. And just to give you an example, legal is one area that's very difficult for us to project between now and the end of the school year. We have one situation that could cost us $50,000 or $60,000, but that could fall in the very end of June, and it will be in this fiscal year, or it could also flow into July, which is next year's budget. So we're watching lots of smaller items like that that are in our budget too.
So everything under deficit is overrunning your current budget. That's correct? Okay. All right, thank you. Yeah, this is a good chart, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Mrs. Merriam?
So for the funds that are being held in reserve, are there things that we're not doing right now that we wanted to do? And could you kind of just give us a sense of, is it lines 7, 8, and 9? Things that we're not currently doing for instructional office, maintenance, and technology.
Yeah. Yeah, on the instructional office, most of that is either not purchasing items that we intended to purchase, some curriculum materials, and I believe, Ms. Menzel, that's part of our training for even the end of June, so we froze some of that training as well. We're not doing it. In the maintenance, it's an array of different projects that we had planned to do, and certainly anything we put off, you know, we will need to do them at some point. So it does compound as far as going into the next year. Those are projects that didn't get done this year in order to make the budget balance. And then technology is the same way. Part of that is infrastructure, and part of it were some technology items that we had hoped to replace. Do you have anything to add to that, Ms. Mansell?
Software and supplies.
Software and supplies.
So the instructional part of this, you mentioned purchasing items. Are you talking textbooks? Are we talking, what are we talking?
Some of it was textbook
So it's
oriented.
textbooks. So are these things that are part of the plan that we're supposed to be? Which textbooks? Which kind of level are we talking about?
We were just saying, I believe it is the social studies, and we do have some curriculum that will come into place next year, but we've also had to, you know, look at next budget year as well. So we are adjusting our curriculum cycle going into next year, and we did that as we were talking about the budget this spring, because we know next year's budget is extremely tight, and we're also going to be starting the year being conservative, just not knowing where we are. So some of the training, for instance, our science curriculum is one thing we had put off, so that will impact the actual whole curriculum cycle. Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the board? How about the items that are in deficit? Can we just go over those? Actually, three line, 25, 27, and 29. Tuition,
25, 27 is special ed. 25 is outplacements for special ed.
so do we have more than we anticipated, or just running higher than we anticipated? Meaning more outplacements than we anticipated?
We don't have that updated.
I don't have that, yeah.
Yeah.
27 is professional consultations, that's also special ed. You know, everything in this group is special ed. Those are consultations for evaluations, that kind of thing. And then 29 are teacher and sub-paras. Teacher, I think they said that, teacher and para subs.
Right.
Those will offset the savings up above in salaries.
On
So-
personnel services?
Right. So, go ahead.
Yeah, and I might just add, when you look at that line in the top in personal services, part of that was intentional as well. So as we were being conservative this spring, if we had a para who left us during the middle of the semester, and we could have a sub in there while we were searching for a teacher, that actually, it makes your sub line go up, but it's actually a savings versus getting the teacher in there immediately, or a para. We didn't do that with teaching positions, but with some of our para positions, we did. And we froze those positions for, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, just to give us a little bit of a cushion.
Okay. Okay. Any follow-up on that, Mrs. Marion?
So I'm just wondering, trending-wise, in terms of special ed, looking at next year, what you're contemplating. I mean, you set the budget for next year, quite a while ago now, and these trends were deficits with special ed. Do you feel like this is going to continue this way and put us at a deficit for next year?
To be honest, that's a category that's almost impossible for us to estimate because it changes all throughout the year. But then you have to keep in mind, we'll have seniors who are graduating that were in the budget this year, but then you may have somebody who is placed next month. And and the reason I say I can't give you the exact number or what that number means without really pulling the detail is in outplacement, if you remember one of the charts we showed during the budget, can range from, 15 or 20,000 up to 300. So that could actually just be one placement and one student. The average cost is 112,000.
All right, thank you. Mr. Walsh?
In regards to what you're holding back in maintenance, the 225, let's say call it $226,000, what does that make up specifically? What is not going to be maintained in the town's buildings between now and the end of the year? Specifically.
There was a project at Osborne that's not getting done. It was just a project that was put on hold by Tom, and he had maintenance reasons for doing that. There's savings in some others. There's another project at Ward that came in less than budgeted. Replacing a playground was in there that's not being done. I think that's the Allen Hill one. And then the rest of it is all savings in accounts that they just held off on either supplies or one of the accounts is preventative maintenance. I'm not sure what he's, where he saved that. Technical consulting.
So basically, we don't have any specifics on anything here tonight in that regard? So you're talking about projects,
I
but
can give you
we're not even
areas.
talking about what projects they are or what amounts are being held back or anything. At what school?
The projects, I can tell you.
What?
And I did.
The EEC playground, how much is that?
No, I think that was Holland Hill.
That's what I thought it was. I thought it was the Holland Hill Playground, because when we went on the tour, they talked about not doing that playground.
Right. Project at Ward,
Is that the EEC
Asphalt.
program?
no, it's
Playground?
some paving project.
Okay.
The Holland Hill, and the Osborne Hill, those were the big ones.
When you say Osborne Hill, you said Osborne Hill, something in Osborne Hill, but what is the project at
Acoustical-
Osborne Hill?
Acoustical ceilings?
Acoustical ceiling, all right. Would you be able to, just so we can get more specifics and can move on, could you have Tom write a complete write-up on that $226,000? And specifically, I'd like to know whether any of those projects were supposed to be maintained the previous year and were not completed, and therefore were carryover projects and they're not now being carried over again.
It would be good to know that for technology as well, because I think some technology had been deferred from the year prior.
I just want to make sure, and when we review this, whether, I'm afraid of projects being carried over because of tough budget years and maintenance not being done and it becoming continual. I mean, because we've had this project with roofs and it led to leaks in building envelopes and it turned into McKinley coming down and because of mold and things like that. And I just want to make sure we're not pushing projects off year after year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Mottola?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Walsh on that. Was some of it during, you indicated that you thought that some of that money was attributed to projects that may have been bid out, but they came in lower? Is that, it sounded like you said something like that, and if you didn't, then I misunderstood. But can you clarify that?
Yeah, it'd be easier if I could send you a list.
Okay, thank you.
If that's the case, John, like you were talking about, then actually the amount of money that we're not spending is greater because we're having savings in other programs, because when the bids go out, we're getting better savings. So that would tell me that actually the repair amounts that we're not doing are larger than the 226. Correct?
And some are still, I don't even have them reflected as, they were out to bid, and I don't think it's been awarded yet, so I don't even know what the results are.
Okay.
So,
But the board or the administration has made the decision that you're putting this 226 on hold, is that correct? Until the
Yes.
end of the year? A decision's been made not to do these projects, whether they're out to bid or not, correct?
right.
Okay. And you're going to wait till the end of the year to see whether you can do them or not, or,
Yes, and if we have time to do them, we will.
okay, great.
Mr. Walsh, I think that if we have a savings in one project,
Yeah.
if we didn't have the savings, we would have had to find another project to offset it. So I don't think it's more. I think it's actually less as a result of that savings.
All right, I'm confused, because if there's savings in a program that we already know about, right, and they're being taken into account on the 225, 876, so that's a negative number, the savings? Or is it a positive number? Because if it was a positive, it would tell me it was a cost overrun on something. So if you're saying that it's a savings, if we're
It's
taking
budget.
into account savings that we found throughout the year in that area, and it tells me that the amount of maintenance in other areas is higher, if we're taking into account the savings that we've had. Am I
two-
missing something?
The 225 for maintenance is one, that's one department where everything is lumped in as on reserve,
Okay,
instead of breaking it down between, a deficit account or an account with savings. It's all lumped in together.
it's all lumped in, but you had mentioned that there were savings in some areas,
Yes,
and that's lumped in there too, we're correct? So some of the other projects were probably budgeted for larger amounts that we're not doing.
correct.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get
Yep.
to that point, which is not what Mr. Dwyer just said.
I think we're saying the same thing, just using different words.
Okay.
You good, Mr. Walsh?
Sure, okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
The technology that's being held back to $260,000, what areas are that? Is that major projects, or is that a bunch of things at many of the different schools?
Off the top of my head, I think 96,000 is in equipment,
What type of equipment?
replacement, equipment,
Okay.
computers,
Computers?
yeah.
Is that the specific thing, computers?
Computers, monitors.
Okay.
I don't, I think maybe, I think about 50,000 of it, I think, is in supplies, and the rest is software.
All right. Did we hold off on computer purchases last year as well, or no?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. So the amount we had budgeted last year, we bought all those computers?
Mhm.
Okay. And the software that went along with it?
Yep.
Great. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other follow-up questions? When will we know, did you say, Dr. Jones, about the $800,000? Have you heard anything at all from the state?
They did, well, the bulk of that is excess cost, and I would be shocked if we didn't get that. That's...
If we did not
If
get
we did
that?
not get it, yeah. I mean, I'm fairly confident that we'll get that.
That's the excess cost, right? But when will we know?
At the end of May, we get the payment at the end of May.
So we just get the payment? They don't let us know the payment's, that's 2 weeks from now.
They updated the website, and when we called them, they say, the
Checks in
staff
the
at
mail?
the State Department say, as far as we know, you will get it.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
It's the
Have a
first
number.
What?
I have a number, and I have a statement, I just don't have the money yet.
Right, so they said, as far as we know, you will get
Right.
the $800,000. And that would make us clear for the year. That means they've met their obligations for this year.
Correct.
Okay. Now, 2018, it's a different story. Right. Okay.
Yeah. It's an
Eight.
unwritten story.
It's an unwritten story. Okay. Mr. Walsh?
This is the first selectman and the fiscal officer, chief fiscal officer. Have you, either of you gentlemen, heard of any potential cuts in this area that you've seen or the governor's discussed or there's rumors about in Hartford that you've heard about? Even if it's through CCM or anything else like that, in regards to this specific area of funding
For this year?
for this year?
The governor issued, the state issued documents a couple of weeks ago indicating what funds they were not going to be paying. This was not included.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't heard about anything touching excess costs for this year.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yep, Mr. DeWitt.
Clarification, and I don't mean to take us back too long, but, beginning of the fiscal year, we were talking about a $1 million deficit, which is when you started holding back reserving. Was that 1 million or 1.2, whatever it was that 810,000 part of that number, or?
No.
I didn't think so, right. So that $1 million was purely excess in the budget. Okay, great, that's what I thought, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any other follow-up? Mr. Walsh?
What were the biggest surprises, other than heat and lack of snow and things like that, that you found between the second quarter and third quarter? And that's to all three of you, to the extent you want to answer.
Surprises either way?
Yes.
Well,
Positives, negatives.
well, I think the biggest one's always special ed.
Okay.
They went up a couple $100,000.
Okay.
Legal went up. That, we had been projecting that. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
I wouldn't call it a surprise, but as Dr. Jones said, any positions that we could hold, any vacancies that we could hold, we did to try to recoup some funds. We did. So that's why there's a positive number there.
Okay. Anything else? No?
No, other than the winter, the savings on snow.
Savings on the
yeah.
inventory. Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't say a surprise, but a compliment. With 1 month on the job, our new superintendent started to hold back on expenses, because her initial analysis said this is going to be a tough year, and too often people will not make those early decisions, which then make more difficult the next decision. So it's not a surprise, but a compliment.
Great. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Mr. Walsh, everyone else? Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much. Just in case there's a question about 2018, which there was the last quarterly meeting, could you just stay for a couple more minutes?
I'll stay as long as Mr. Mottola does. He's giving me a ride home.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, then we're going to move on to the town side and turn it over to Mr. Mayor or Ms. Bassi. Where would you like to begin?
With Ms. Bassi.
Excellent. And where would you like to begin?
The summary sheet, I think, is always a good kind of place to
Okay.
start where it all kind of comes together. You're going to see a lot of the same numbers as we're seeing the past quarter or two. On the revenue side, the revenue is slightly more favorable than we thought at Q2. Went from 470 to 600, just with collections and collection rates. And building revenues, we're projecting a slight overage, given what's going on in town at the universities and down by the beach area. Town clerk, projecting as of March a negative 100, which has to do with recording and conveyance, but spring is their busy time, so that was the last, I spoke to the town clerk, that was her projection. The state revenue, Exhibit A, which should be the sheet right behind it. We had, as you guys know, about a $93,000 unfavorable hit just the other day. And that's basically the difference between the Q2 number and Q3. So that negative 3375 includes the negative 93 that just came in.
And where is that on Exhibit A?
At Exhibit A, yeah. So there's basically a couple columns. There's the budget, there was what was projected given the various governors' updates, and then just to kind of see how much we've actually received, given where the state is column C, and that was updated as of last week, and nothing's come in since. Okay. So the first boxed column is the negative 3375, which looks at the projected versus budget. As you can see, there's not much left to come in. There was only about another 93 that still needs to come in, so that would be our worst case scenario.
Okay.
Okay.
Should we stick with revenues for a moment? Anyone have any questions?
Just to,
Mr. DeWitt?
I don't understand that last comment,
The last boxed column on the
Yeah.
right-hand side
right?
is basically what we've received versus projected. So we've received everything other than 93. That 93 normally comes in the last quarter anyways.
Got it, but
But we're
the worst
saying
case
it's
is,
shut
the worst
off.
case is what we had in the budget versus what we're going to receive.
Well, this is
Which
the
is
worst
the-
case from the projected to the budget, now it's received.
Got
From
it.
what we knew.
Right.
Yes.
Because the real number as of today is really 3.467, as of 5/12.
If we
Rec-
stopped receiving.
If we stopped
yes.
receiving, right.
So there's only 93 left coming in.
Which the bulk of is our education cost sharing grant that they cut off in the middle of the year.
We're still going to be short. Yeah.
Okay, any questions on revenue? We can come back to it, but in the variance report? I mean, building permits, that's what's driving some of the positive news, correct?
The building revenues, yeah, are positive, and Park and Rec is,
Exceeding revenue projections?
yep. due to a few rate increases, and then they're projecting like a 28,000 favorable for Penfield. So there's been a couple different areas there.
Okay, good.
This is expenditure.
Okay, so we'll go to expenses.
Where's the investment income stand from last quarter?
Last quarter, we had a negative 215.
So that's gotten considerably worse.
A little bit worse, yep.
A little?
Because that now includes the bank fees. We're over by like 20 or so, so about 20 of that is bank fees, so.
It was pretty much the impact of the, at the end of the quarter anyway, the potential Trump tax bill hit the bond markets.
Hit the bond markets?
Right.
Okay.
Less taxes, more deficit, more borrowing, higher interest rates.
Has it recovered since then?
Recovered somewhat. I have not double-checked, but yes, some of it's recovered.
Do you have a percentage, like half of it? No?
Can't tell you.
So where do you think that'll come out at the end of the year? Is that a guess?
That's a guess. I mean, it's,
But we'll recover some, you think?
right now, the tax bill is, depends on what happens in Washington, you know. It's kind of
Day by day.
lot going on down there.
It is day by day, okay.
Yeah. Tweet by tweet.
Okay,
Fake news by fake news.
keep going. Okay, expenses.
The first section under the expenses are the numbers you've seen, I think, 3 or 4 times now, were the 2016 carryovers. And that we've used to offset our debt service. The Board of Ed number is slightly favorable due to, I think, some favorable medical experience from the Internal Service Fund.
The one thing you might note is on the prior quarter, under the holds, there was $100,000 for library, but given where we are and given the timing, that was released last week.
Can you see that again, Mr. Mayor?
The hold on the library for $100,000 worth of materials, that was released last week.
It was released, okay. Okay.
So he's into the next section, the operational savings and the hold savings.
Operational savings and the hold savings. Okay.
So again, a lot of those are the ones basically that have been repeated since, I think, last September. The vacancies got a little bit more favorable, but the assessor, the legal, legal assessment, those were all on the saving sheet, as was, we put the hold piece somewhat down below it, the Public Works 700 and the Fire 75. And what Mr. Mayor's referring to, there was an additional 100 for the library that was just released last week.
That's not on here.
It was released, so there won't be a variance.
Right, gotcha, okay.
Is that a Board of Selectmen decision, or is that a First Selectman decision?
Administration decision.
Excuse me?
Administration decision based upon the projections that we're seeing.
And what was the rationale behind that between Public Works, Fire, and there was only 3 of them on there? Was there only 3? There was Public Works, Capital, Fire, and Library. And what was, I guess the First Selectman's going to have to come up with, I'd like an explanation of what was the reasoning of the administration for releasing the 100 to Library versus these others.
I didn't speak for himself, but from my perspective, they were hit last year, they're hitting next year. They were hit next year even before the latest governor's revised budget came out. So it seemed like the rational place to put it.
All right, but Public Works has not exactly been having Merry Christmases for the last 5 years, I guess is the question. I guess
Actually, for the last 5 years, that's not correct. Factually, we've been building up, both putting more equipment into our budget, right? And we've been maintaining that up until this year.
Right.
And we have been, because until the state hit $3 million last year, we kind of handled that, so it wasn't a traumatic impact. But as Mr. DeWitt pointed out, that's that $3 million shortfall from last year that we covered in this year's budget. So it's fiscal 17 was the first year that we really hit them with that.
How many pieces of equipment were purchased? I'm not talking about pickup trucks, but larger pieces of equipment were purchased in 17.
I'd have to check with Mr.
Why don't we bring them up?
Mr.
If
Bartlett
you guys
or
can
Mr.
come up
Michelangelo?
from the Public Works Department. Do you guys have the numbers, or am I asking questions that you can't answer?
This year, how many trucks did we have on hold this year? We had 2 big trucks, right?
This current budget, no, we have two
There's 2 on hold.
on hold. So this year we had, I believe, 1 from capital and one from the capital non-recurring and 1 from operating, I believe. But we have 2 on hold for a total of 400,000.
2 on hold. How many were purchased?
Yeah, and once again, from my memory, I think 1 out of the operating budget and 1 out of capital non-recurring.
In 2016, how did it work? Do you remember?
No, that I definitely have to check numbers to
Yeah,
give
I'm
you
pretty
an accurate-
sure that was 2 and 2.
Yeah,
2
I
on
think-
hold?
No, two purchased, 2 out of non-recurring.
Okay.
2 out of the operating budget. We were building up to getting 4 every year out of the operating budget.
I think
So in
that's correct.
2016, you got all 4? You got 2 out of non-recurring and 2 out of your budget?
I
And they
believe
were,
that-
and they
I-
were all purchased?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
In 2015, it was 1 out of the operating budget and 3 out of non-recurring.
And out of the approved budget, where do you stand?
Out of the approved budget, we have
For 18?
we have one was approved for purchase next year.
And how many weren't? 3. They're not even on hold. They're just not going to be. They're just not there.
Correct.
Good news is there's only 1 to put on hold. Okay. So the decision was made by the administration to spend $100,000, all of it that was there for the library, and just is there any plans on doing anything with the rest of the savings?
Yeah, we are going to continue to evaluate that as we go through the year. At that point in time, we felt comfortable releasing $100,000.
Okay.
We had just, we were concerned initially that we had a $700,000 hit potentially from the state. That, as you just heard, has been reduced to another, risk of about $100,000, I think, between now and the end of the year. So that's what our concern is. So given that number, releasing $100,000 seemed like an appropriate thing to do, and it gave the library some time to plan on that, given they took a significant hit in fiscal 18, and giving them some time to plan on how they'd spend that money seemed to make sense.
Okay. So the net variance, other than the amount that we have going into surplus, which is where it's supposed to go, so that's $516,000. Correct?
Yeah, I will.
Okay. So when will you wait till the end of the 4th quarter, or are you going to wait till further after that to make the decision about what to do with the $516,000, whether you're going to apply it towards Public Works capital or fire?
Or fire?
There's a fire of $75,000 that's on hold.
Yes, correct. It depends on where we stand at the end of this. Jim, it really depends on where we're going to be.
But do you need to make a
both-
decision by June 30th on that?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe, I think we have to have any POs issued by June 30th, is my understanding.
Okay, so you'll make a
We
decision
could
right
make
around
it
there.
June 29th. We're not going to necessarily wait till that long, but we want as good information as we can. We don't want anything to risk where we are this year.
Sure.
And then based on what we are looking at in 2018, we'll try and manage both doing our best in this year, but also look with one eye towards the future, as we did with the library, to say, look, they are taking a significant hit. It might get worse, but we know they're already taking a significant hit, and 100,000 of them is a significant amount of money.
But the only amount that you could spend on that at the end, once you see where all the numbers are coming in, is really the net estimated variance, because the surplus money is going to be going to surplus,
Yeah,
correct?
the decisions we're making are based on the hold number,
Sure.
all right? Because that's approved to spend.
Yep.
We just decided not to spend that to see what the additional state cuts would be, and fortunately, so when we came up against a potential 700 grand 4 weeks ago,
Yep.
we knew it wasn't a crisis. It wasn't nice, but it wasn't a crisis.
Sure.
That we would get through the end of the year. Fortunately, we got most of that money, so it was less of an issue. That's why we're going back and looking at what we can do from a standpoint of releasing some of these holds. Any of the additional money, I believe, just from an authorization process or an approval process, we would have to come back before this board.
Yes,
As
the
I think we- and I
550, you'd
think-
have to come back to this board to,
And I think we did that last year, if memory serves.
Mhm.
So anything from that would be a very public, in essence, the other money's we've been authorized to spend.
yes,
We just chose to save it,
yes,
for lack of a better term, in case.
in case. And some of the variances might improve, so you potentially could have more, or you
We're
could have
doing
less.
everything we can to make sure those. We put some processes in place back when we first got hit with a $570,000 cut in December.
Mhm.
And again, our concern then was that would not be the last cut. Because we did that, getting cut $100,000 now is not good, but we can manage that.
Okay.
If we got cut 700 grand and hadn't put some of these processes in place, we could be in serious jeopardy.
Okay.
What else is there left to cut from this state? Like, what else could, right, there's not much left.
Sorry, do you want to have that discussion in public?
I don't want to give anyone ideas, if that's what you mean. Because we also backed off on some paving, too, it looks like.
About 300,000 in paving, correct?
That's not in that number.
It's in
It's in
That's
the
on,
700
that's
number.
part of the whole.
capital dash various, so it's in the
Capital.
various amount.
It says capital.
It says dash various, that's in the various amount.
Oh, I thought that meant various capital. Oh,
No.
Yeah, it does.
so that is including,
It's basically,
Well,
it's
Apple's
basically,
considered
it's
capital.
basically 2 trucks and and
paving's not in
paving.
capital, it's in their operating budget.
Well, as are these trucks. It's all in your operating budget.
But they are capital accounts.
Capital items within our operating budget.
We-
as
we-
opposed
They're
to
not spending from the
non-recurring
operating.
We're not bonding them. It's not non-recurring, it's not a longer-term bond.
Okay. Well, we'll have a meeting or two before then, and we could take a look and see if you release any funds.
Yep, just if you'll keep your fingers crossed, yes.
Ms. Bossy? Mr. Becker, you had a question?
Well, about the library.
Go ahead.
So they got 100,000 released. There was a whole lot of discussion and adjustments in the budget for 18 related to weekend hours. Yet if you go up on their website, they're closed on Sundays now. No real announcement. It sort of occurred, I think, all the way up until September. So they got the money, and it was pretty clear people didn't want weekend hours adjusted. They even got 100 grand to make sure that, they were in better shape to close out this fiscal year. When did that decision take place? Was it before? Was it after? Are they going to undo it now that they've got money?
Yeah, I'm not sure what decision you're talking about, Dave.
If you go on their website
Okay?
and you look at their hours, they are closed on Sundays from now until at least September. It says the fall in one place, it says September somewhere else. I don't know what date it occurred. I mean, in my case, I know that we were planning something for our kid this weekend and went up on the website to double-check what hour they opened, and it says, on Sunday, it says closed until Sep in one place and then fall in another.
Yeah, I'll be happy to
Yet they were given
follow.
$100,000
Yep,
and
I'll
the
be
funds
hap-
to not do that.
I'll be happy to follow up with the library. The $100,000 that we released specifically was for library materials.
Don't they close
Understand,
in
but-
May through September on Sundays anyway? I thought that was their normal procedure.
There were
the warm
summer
months.
adjustments, but it was my understanding, I mean, we spent a fair amount of time, and nowhere did it come up that,
So in
My-
other words, is this an annual closing?
it'd be
I
helpful.
thought it
to know.
was. I thought it
And it's not
was.
summer yet, I mean, it's July and
Maybe they
August
do
maybe,
May
but we're
through September. I don't know. I
it's
could
in
be
for
wrong.
another month.
could follow
I mean,
up.
If you want me to,
Mr. Petro.
if you ask us to follow up
If
and
you
get
could
back to
follow
you
up,
with
that'd
an
be
answer,
helpful.
that would be
Because it
good.
was surprising
Thank
to
you.
see, especially after so much discussion and funds in a couple different places to try to keep their operations running as normal.
Yeah, I think this is normal, I think those are normal summer hours.
So we could, is it earlier? It just seemed,
It's just that you wanted to
It
take your
seemed- it
kid
just
there.
seemed-
So to you, it's early.
As
I guess, you know.
Again, I would
I don't know,
suggest
it just seemed
that the person who has
odd
the
in
answer
May.
is not in this room, and if
Yeah.
you let us get the answer,
we
we can
could.
We
probably
anxious-
save some time.
yes, We await your follow-up.
Thank you.
If you could
All right,
just
thank you,
ask
Mr. Becker.
when
Anything?
this whole summer hour thing started, and, if it's just a normal thing, it's a normal thing, but
Yeah.
if it's what the history of it's been.
I'm just
Okay.
going to go to Pequot. They're open, but, still. But yeah, no. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Becker. Anyone else?
Oh, yeah, no.
Anyone else? Okay, we're done with the library. Anyone else? Ms. Bossy?
I think that's about it. If you look at the numbers you guys have talked about, the 516 favorable plus the 550 is about $1 million or so, which is close to what it was last quarter. So no real surprises occurred in Q3.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Bossy? Mrs. Leclerc?
Yeah, so this schedule is through March 31st. What do you envision through the rest of the fiscal year? Is there anything?
This is a projection as of June,
Okay, so it includes...
as of March 31st.
So this is your best guess where we're going to end up?
For June, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hence us taking off the whole thing and updating it for the governor's stuff that just kind of happened. It's everything that we kind of know of.
Okay.
If anything extraordinary happened as of March, I would put it on after March to today.
You would have included it?
Yes.
Okay, that's what my question was. Thanks.
Mr. Becker?
Yeah, so I don't know if either now or at some point we're going to have some sort of a projecting out to fiscal 18 discussion, but to that extent, thinking about, that, I know it's going to net out a little bit differently, but seeing the surplus number, thinking of some of the things that we did last year, are we looking to do things like that? As long as our fund balance stays up, are we looking to do things like that as we project out? And should we be either now or at what stage should we be either approving that or sort of giving the blessing
Well, don't forget, I
towards
just
it?
want to caution you, last year, we were able to, you can never spend more than is authorized.
Yeah.
Last year, our surplus took place due to our higher revenue. So hence, we were then able to use about $1 million or so from 16. So our debt service this year is like $1 million under because we had these figures. But if we're at our expense level, you can't overspend your expense
Yeah.
even though your revenues are higher. So just keep that in mind.
No, agree, though there are some things that we can, maybe not the full amount similar to last year,
Right,
but
I'm
where
saying
we
last year we
could,
had that flexibility because we had the revenue that fell down to equity.
but we could be,
If we're under on our expenses, then yes.
the capital items, there are some things that we could, right at,
We could look at.
before year end, we could front load in and get them done,
Yes, you just
knowing that
can't
it gives
rely
breathing
on
room next year.
The revenue.
The revenue
is all I'm
side,
saying.
yeah, it won't be the same mixture, and it'll be significantly less, last year being, what, 3 million, right? But,
Right, and now our revenue's projected
So
to
we-
come in under because of the state, but.
yeah, but there might be some, I think it's a worthwhile discussion. It definitely, taking down more hits, and it definitely worked to ease some of that, so.
So your question is, when should we have that discussion?
Yeah, it may be a little bit premature tonight, but starting that conversation off is
Right.
probably not a bad idea, so we get in the mindset, and, I think we did, right around just after budget, have that initial conversation last year, and then I think somewhere maybe around June, we were updated, and then it took place.
So
And I think it didn't need our vote initially, maybe some.
You
some
voted
things
in,
the end.
you voted in September.
The cleanup,
When we
yeah.
know that those, the ABCD
Yeah.
schedules.
But to initiate some of them at year end, the administration was able to get things going and then
Right,
allow us to
right,
vote.
we brought it before the body, because obviously, maybe not obviously, everybody listening at home, but the process requires Board of Finance approval at that September meeting.
Yeah.
So we initiated conversations to get, I won't say a formal sense, but an informal sense of the body, to see if everybody was on the same page with that strategy, and everybody was, and so that's how we proceeded. We'll be looking at all those
Yeah.
again this year, yeah.
I bring it up. I
Yeah.
think this was the first, this meeting was the first time we talked last year, so
Yeah.
I think, it'd be helpful to get I don't know how much clarity you have on 18, but it seems like it's continuing to deteriorate, so anything like this that we can do, if others agree. So,
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Becker.
yep, thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question on the Register of Voters, the special election, and what we spent year-to-date, and how much, depending on where we go with this, you know, what's budgeted, to put a budget together?
I think, and Ms. Bossi has more detailed numbers than I have, I think the total estimate for the special election is about $20,000. The expenditures to date to prepare have been like in the $2,000 to $3,000 bracket. Most of the expenditures are $17,000 of the amount is same-day labor, if you will. Does that include the training the week before? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so so you have a training day a week before where all the workers get paid $50. Then you have the work on the day of the election. So as of right now, limited expenditures and the ballots will be ordered, and that amount is
The ballots are ordered. It's about $3,800.
$3,800. So we're looking about $6,000 before the week of the election.
Okay. Mr. DeWitt?
Does that include town clerk with the absentee ballots?
I would think so, yes.
Okay, where would the balance of the funds come from?
We will be coming, the registrars are slightly under budget this year, so we will be coming, on your June meeting, there'll be 2 items, actually, that we'll be requesting be spent out of contingency. I think about $7,000 to $10,000 for the registrar.
Yeah, maybe 10 or 13.
I take that back, $10,000 to $13,000 for the registrar, and close to $300,000 to clean up the some of the waste contamination at the on the what's referred to as the Julian pile.
Right, we'll talk about that. We have guests here to talk about that.
Yes, special guest.
Special guests. Mrs. Merriam?
Is there anything that the registrar is doing in terms of notifying people that there's a special election via postcard mailing? I know they've done that in the past in terms of telling people there's an election and polling places, et cetera.
Not that I'm aware of.
So the town is moving as though we're going to have this election.
There's no stay, so the answer is yes.
Did you have a question, Mr. Wall?
Are the ballots dated? Can they be used whether a stay gets put in place or not?
I
guess
think
is the
so,
question.
yes.
You think so, yes? Okay. Are they optical scanner ballots? Are we using optical scanners?
We're using what we use normally.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other
questions?
Mr. Walsh?
Where does the numbers stand with the snow removal? Were we over or under?
Probably on, right?
There's no variance to the Public Works budget overall.
Where do we stand on the snow budget itself? Were you over? Why don't you guys come up then? We can talk about your budget. For snow removal for the year, were we on budget, over budget, under budget?
Slightly over budget of about 60,000. 23 of that thousand was overtime, which will be offset in other overtime account lines.
Other overtime for your department because it's lower in certain other areas?
Well, it's going to have to be lower to help balance the budget. So 60,000 was our net in the red for snow. 23,000 was directly related to overtime costs. So to offset that number, we were just cutting back on overtime till June 30th.
Okay.
So our net result is, and we'll pick it up in materials and such, is a 37,000 shortfall. But to Caitlin's point, we're going to come in with a balanced budget.
Okay. All right. In regards to energy and things like that, where do you guys stand with that? I mean, not regarding the, like, say, heating buildings, are we seeing a net positive variance in those accounts? Just like the school did?
Under the Public Works in the expenditure report, the ones with the comments.
Yes, I was looking at that, and that's where I started.
Every line item has its own kind of notes that Mr. Bowman gave me.
Okay, and that's on, so page 5 of 7, where it says...
Page 4 of 7, we're starting with utilities
4 of 7.
gas.
Okay.
So each of them has their own comment section. I mean, I could read them, but you can read them yourself, I suppose. But
So show me which line we're talking about.
well, there's one that says utilities gas, and it says timing. That only represents 8 months of invoices.
It's
We
the
use-
last line on the page.
Okay. I was up at utilities electric, I guess, when
Oh.
okay. So now we're down at the very last line. Utilities gas, yep,
Okay, so that one could be 15K
The rest are on
under.
your next page.
yep.
Then there's electric,
Okay.
and so forth. Overall, since, like we said, it's in Scott's Public Works budget, we're going to be on budget. So even if some accounts are a little bit over, some are going to be under to offset that.
But in general, did we see the same type of savings from the buildings and things like they saw for the Board of Education?
Yes, the natural gas will be under. We use very little heating oil fuel, so you'll see the heating oil, I think, went over, but that was because of one large delivery, literally right before the quarter ended, skewed it. But that puts us in better shape for oil next year. But mostly it's natural gas, and overall, I think it will come in lower than projected.
It was actually a good purchase. Oil prices spiked shortly after the purchase.
But we're still over budget.
For the oil, once again, one large delivery threw that out of whack.
Have it in inventory.
But it's there for next October, November.
Okay. So we weren't, for the gas line itself, we're only possibly going to be $15,000 under pursuant to that line. But it seemed to be a warmer winter than, so we weren't really a lot of savings there.
Okay, well, I think Mr. Bowen was conservative in the projected savings. So, we'll see what the end comes out at the end of the year.
Okay.
If you want to, I think he errs on the side of caution. If it's going to come in one way or the other, he wants to come in, slightly underestimated.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other follow-up questions? Ms. Boss?
Just one. What were your, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the Board of Education. What were your biggest surprises the two of you saw when comparing the second quarter to the third quarter results?
As I stated, there wasn't a lot of variance.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is, the thing that really hits us usually in the third quarter is snow. So now we know.
Without the snow.
That's over.
Yep.
So a lot of the numbers are right where they were at Q2. So
Yep.
the good news is there was no surprises.
No surprises.
No unfavorable ones anyways.
Okay. No, I didn't see any big things, but I just wanted to know what you guys started.
No, the biggest surprise is that we're so close.
That's a surprise.
Not really. Anything else? Mr. Mayor, do you have any other further comment?
One, yes, thank you. There was a discussion at a prior meeting which was not noted in the minutes. The chair and I spoke about this, he asked me to bring it up, and that was a request to have Mr. Bowman attend a quarterly review to discuss the cost benefit of some of his projects. And he would, he's requested that I remind you guys and that you guys maybe set a date certain for his report,
Okay.
and that it make the minutes.
Well, we could see,
Sir, do you want to set a date for the next meeting? Why don't we have the June meeting? There doesn't seem to be a lot on it, correct, so far?
right?
So why don't we have them come to the June meeting?
Yeah, I don't know what's on the meeting besides
Well, let's put it there, and then you and
we
Mr.
have
Flynn can
transfers and
discuss
we
it.
have the contingency, I think that's it. Yeah. I'll
Seems like a
check
good
if
meeting.
he's,
Right.
we'll check tomorrow to make sure he's not
Okay.
planning any vacation.
All right, you-
And I have one other question.
Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Bossi, is there anything that you know of coming up in the fourth quarter that you expect to see a variance that we should know about, just to going forward, the things that you might know about that are coming up?
No,
That
as
they-
I stated, this is with all knowledge I know as of today.
No, I'm not talking about the third quarter. Stuff that
No, I
you know
realize
about coming up
that.
in the
If
fourth quarter.
something happened even after March that
Yeah.
happened in
Okay.
April or even yesterday, it would be on the sheet.
It'd be on the sheet, okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, a little clarification to that and a comment. Yeah, when we do this, we do our best to project what we think's going to happen
Okay.
as well. Thus, the surprise that this is so close to the last quarter because, knock on wood, the projections luckily or fortunately or through good works are still on target. The one item I mentioned earlier, we're going to be bringing about $300,000 of contingency. But that contingency account is for the 17 budget is $450,000. So with nothing else happening, that could be another $150,000 positive variance.
Okay.
Well, that's good to know.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to know.
That's good to know.
Before we move on, is there any other follow-up questions? One last, for 2017 or 18, because if not, we'll let the Board of Ed go home, except for Mr. Dwyer, who's stuck.
There's always Uber.
Okay. Thank you for coming. Why don't we talk about this pile-related cleanup cost that is coming our way? The infamous pile. It's basically become a nightmare. Mr. Michelangelo?
Yes, so as a result of contaminants that were reported to us on December 13th, test samples were taken on November 29th. They came back several weeks later, 10 days later. Got notification there was an area of contaminated soils there. Couple hits. We went up and did some follow-up tests, set up a grid pattern, and identified the approximate plume of where the material was dumped. So there is contaminated material there. Been working with the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. We have a licensed environmental professional who, together with Mr. Carey, put out a public bid for the remediation based on a per-ton price, and we have an approximate amount of price. The bids came back. The total bid is $192,500. Once again, that's based on quantities. So with the request that Mr. Mayor was referring to, there's an allowance in there for some flexibility in the amount of quantity we actually have to remove. There is money for professional services, once again for an LEP, to provide oversight on that, and there's some analytical testing involved also. So that's where the number will be higher than the $192,000 for the bid. And once again, that should be on the June 6th meeting for a transfer from contingency, and then if all goes well, we could start just about immediately after that.
Okay. So, before we talk about the finances of this, are there any specific questions on what Mr. Michelangelo just relayed to us?
Can you point out what we're looking at? I
Uh,
can make out Rod Highway.
Yeah, so this is the area of the Public Works yard. So this is the entire aggregate fill pile. And just to orientate you, this is the bus lot over here. This is the Harvest New England. So to get there, you come around One Rod Highway, and you actually have to enter the Public Works garage, go by our salt shed, and it's tucked in the back over there. So this is the entire site where the aggregate processing was occurring. And the area of the spoils, or the contaminated material, is an area over here approximately, 100 by 100 is the area we tarped off over in that corner of the facility there. So if you drive there now, it's currently where there's a large excavator sitting there. The excavator was used to dig the test pits. It'll be moved, but that's where the contaminated material is and will be remediated.
It's a huge area.
The entire parcel is probably around 6 acres. So this area here, I don't want to get Brian said, so that area here is about 6 acres. And once again, the contaminated area is, and I used the 100 by 100. That's when we tarped it off. That was the tarp. And the grid pattern, Brian, that we sampled.
So the sampling grid pattern is it's 60 by 100 feet long. So it was estimated about 2,200 tons when we went out there and did the sampling under protocol, the DEP protocol. So when we first found the material, it appeared to be isolated in this area, as opposed to the other material throughout the whole pile. You could tell it was demolition type of material, when the rest of the pile is really just aggregate or broken concrete and brick and things like that. This was, larger pieces of demolition, and that's likely where the PCBs came from. Is building materials that weren't properly tested and then, abandoned on the site. So all the testing has been done in accordance with TSCA level protocols, and that's how we were able to develop the bid specifications for remediation in conjunction with, consultation with the DEP through this whole process. So when this first happened, there was a lot of unknowns. Those unknowns have slowly gone away as we've tested and refined our testing methods and developed our bid specifications. So we're pretty confident at this point with the numbers that are coming back in the bids and the proposal we're going to put in front of you on June 6th.
Mr. DeWitt?
I must have missed something in the last couple months, because I could swear the last time, which was maybe the first time we talked about this was a zero cost to the town. Now all of a sudden we're in for $200,000. And I'm assuming when you say June 6th, you're coming to us with, you're expecting the Board of Selectmen and us to appropriate the not even. You want us to move from contingency. So how did we go from not our problem to $200,000? I'm really confused.
Okay. The contaminants were brought in by others.
Others, who's others?
Well,
Julian.
Julian operated the site, whether it was their trucks that brought it in or other trucks, other contractors that were hauling for them. I don't think we should go into that now. But once again, it was dumped on our property. We've been working with DEP. We haven't gotten any kind of order, but it should be remediated. As most of you know, there is a legal action against Julian, so we're working with the attorneys with all these facts and figures. So, my expectation is that it will lead for hopefully recouping the money. But once again, to take care of the remediation now, we need funds to remediate it.
So I've been dealing directly with the DEP since this kind of happened on December 13th, and they've had what I would characterize as a bit of a hands-off approach, for better or worse. But that hands-off approach is probably not going to last much longer, and that would mean that the town would be issued either a notice of violation or even possibly a consent order, which would direct us to remove this material. So through consultation with them and keeping them in the loop, we've been able to kind of stop that violation order from coming down, and that allows us a little bit more latitude in, working to get this resolved. So, we can sit and discuss, what the fault of the matter, but right now, the best thing for the town is just to get the remediation underway, because we might end up getting an order from the DEP at some point, which would handcuff us and make us do that, and we would have to provide additional assurances and timeframes, and that would lock us into something that in the end run we could stand to issue civil penalties to the DEP, which we're trying to avoid. So,
So it's illegal to have known contaminated materials?
If the DEP
they're going to go somewhere, right? Obviously.
If the DEP could issue an order on this, yes.
Yeah,
So-
they could go places, so. They can go in the air, people can walk over there, and a kid can walk over there.
Even though they're contained in a, what's the word I'm looking for? An area where most people in the city or town don't go to.
So
It's still.
there is no threat to human health or in the environment right now.
Thank you, that's a better way to put it.
But that does not mean that what is out there is not consistent with the remediation standard regulations. And the DEP does have the authority to issue an order for us to move forward and clean that up.
Mr. DeWitt?
Got it. No, thank you.
So,
Well, yeah, let's go.
basically, we're just going to try to clean this stuff up, take care of it, which I think is a proper thing to do. And if we get the money back, it'll just go back into our surplus. Correct? Correct, I think. Okay.
General fund?
So can I ask, what's the timing on the legal, I mean, are we currently negotiating, or are we filing? I mean, what's the timing of this? When might we recoup the money, if at all? And also, can you tell us a little bit more about the fines? What is the cost of a fine that we might incur if we don't comply quickly?
So,
Let me take the first part of that if I could, and just suggest that we really don't want to comment on pending litigation.
Right.
All right, we have, what's public is very clear. We've hired an outside attorney. We're pressing them to make sure that they honor their agreement as we see it. And as Mr. Walsh claimed, yes, we want to make sure that they pay the full price of any of the damage that they did. We also are keeping a Public Works page up on our website so that we will post, all the public available information there, as we have with all the testing, everything else for the last, I'm going to say, 6 to 9 months. And we also put a link up there for a legal website, just so if anyone who wanted to track any of the legal orders, that type of thing, the attorneys know where to go, but the public can actually follow that link to see what any legal status is at any point. And I'll let Brian or Joe answer the rest of that.
yeah, so as far as what the civil penalties could be from the DEP, I mean, they're all over the place, depending on the complexity of the violation. But right now, I don't believe that's even coming down. As long as we initiate remediation and keep this moving, I've been told that there won't be an order issued to the town to clean this up. So we're acting in best faith capacity with the DEP right now. We've shown them progress, albeit it's a little slower than normal. It is occurring, and we just want to keep this ball rolling so that we avoid that.
Mr. Becker?
So, I think I read it was $3 million or somewhere in there was the lawsuit that we filed, but I'm looking at 300 in sort of the expense side, and I know you're going to say you don't want to talk about it in public, and that's fine, but I'm going to ask it, and then if people want to go into executive tonight, another night, however they want to do it, but it makes me worry what our exposure is if stuff like that, if that didn't pan out, and if there's other things we need to be worrying about as a town. So I think it's a valid question. I don't expect you to answer it in public. If others want to go to executive,
What
that's
can we
fine.
talk about?
There's a public newspaper article out
But
on
it
it.
concerns me because there's a discrepancy there, and our job is to worry about sort of the broad scope of the town.
Okay. One, as you correctly pointed out, we're not going to talk about legal strategy, frankly, not in public or in private executive session. However, your observation is well taken. We are following our attorney's advice in terms of what our legal approach is, and certain parts of that are public. This board was around when we were sued by the contractor at the Metro Center. Mr. Walsh, you and I had a discussion about that, for $5 million. That was their approach. We did not pay them $5 million, but that was their approach.
Fine. Didn't expect to get an answer. I respect that.
But in terms of this board, certainly, any financial obligation we have at any point as we come up, we certainly have to come through this board to spend any money. And as we define those obligations, we'll come before this board and let you know. In this case, the immediate obligation is to clean up the contamination. We've gone out to bid. We've estimated some contingency and some other costs for our administering of that, and the LEP, the licensed environmental professional to manage that, at about $290,000. That's what will be coming before you at your next meeting. But I will let Joe or Brian talk a little bit more about the 290 and where that came from.
And there's I do have a question on the timing of that.
You're bringing up good points.
I know where you're going with the timing with the DEP, but that we're right around the edge of the fiscal year ending and going back to the discussion about, moving things between the years. If there's a chance of us recouping potentially somehow in next year's fiscal year those funds, even if we expend them and coming back, I guess, would it make sense to keep the money in this contingency and be able to next year potentially be able to have an expense that then is offset by revenue if it's settled or something along those lines? Because once you do it in this fiscal year, the money goes out. If it comes in next year, it comes in, it goes to surplus, and we don't really have as much control over it, right? I mean, wouldn't we have more control if we tried to have that be in the same fiscal year?
It's not that complicated. We've got 300 grand worth of work to do. We'd like authority to spend that much money. Some of that'll get spent this year and into next year, but it'll be part of this year's actual expenses. If in the future we get that money and potentially more money back, we'll properly account for that at that time.
But in that case, if it was in a different fiscal year, it would go right to surplus or the general fund at that point.
We'll properly account for it. I mean, I think you're trying to make it more complicated than it is from that standpoint.
It's not going back in contingency is the point, whether it comes in this fiscal year or next fiscal year.
And it won't.
It ends up in general fund regardless.
Either way, it
Yeah,
would.
so it's
Okay.
Mrs.
I'm
Leclerc.
good for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
My question is, why are we required to do the cleanup? Why wouldn't the DEP require the person who dumped on our property to clean it up and to cite them for not testing the materials properly?
I'm going to ask Mr. Carey to review the regs on that with you.
Yep. We own the property, and we're liable for the cleanup. Even if someone comes and abandons the material on our property, we're liable. And that's the situation we're in. There was discussions about, and I don't want to get into it too much, but there was discussions about being able to give an order to the contractor who, was operating the site. And the bottom line is, since we own the site, we're liable for the cleanup. If someone, in the state of Connecticut, if someone was driving down the road and basically dumped material on your property and drove away, and it was contaminated, you're liable to clean that material up.
That's why you bring a lawsuit.
I think
Okay.
from my dealings in environmental, we're handling it the proper way. Because we're going to be able to control the cleanup. We are going to be able to hire the company we want to hire. We are going to make sure we're going to know where that material goes to. Because even under the environmental laws, if we had somebody else do it and that goes to an illegal place where it was dumped, the landowner is still responsible for that, even though we didn't clean it up or do it. You're always responsible as the landowner. So why don't we just be responsible, handle it the way we want to handle it, hire the proper people to handle the cleanup, and do it the right way. And this way, we control that. The lawsuit will figure out who's responsible for the cost, whatever way that goes in court.
So if we take it somewhere else and dump it, somebody that we contract out, I know we're not doing it that way, we'd be responsible if they dumped it illegally. So then my question is, where did it come from? And why aren't they responsible
may be.
for this?
There's two questions there. The first one is, so as part of the process and with PCBs, one of the things that drives the cost scenarios is the analytical. If the material is above 50 parts per million, it's TSCA regulated waste. That limits the amount of facilities that are permitted to take the material. If it's below that level, which luckily this is after significant testing revealed that, the cost dropped precipitously because the amount of facilities that are able to take this material because of the permitting is much greater. So because of the level of the PCBs being below 50, there's a lot of facilities that can take the material, and when the bids went out, that's reflected in the pricing, is that we will have certified disposal with manifesting that's basically it's basically sent to the state and to the facility. So we know when it goes to the facility for disposal, we're off the hook. There's no more liability. They're accepting the liability for that.
I understand that. That's half the question, but I saw Mr. Tetro get a little squeamish with the first part of the question, which is, when I asked the question on where did it come from, where did this stuff come from?
That's what the lawsuit is over.
You have to follow it.
Right.
There's a link on the website.
We got to go backwards, right? Know where it came from and who owned the property. All right.
That's what we're
Okay.
suing our friends
Lots of
over.
discovery about that.
Okay.
Depositions, interrogatories, manifests, all sorts of stuff. It becomes tracking this stuff.
So this could take years.
It could take years. Could take a day. Somebody could want to settle it in a day. It could take years.
Okay.
Go to a full jury trial. I mean, you could.
We don't know.
I don't
Okay.
know. And I will tell you, I have 1,000 questions, but I know they're not proper to ask because now we're in suit, so we can't really talk about it. So it's a frustration I personally have, because there's 1,000 questions I'd love to ask about it. We're not going to get the answers tonight, nor do we probably have the right to answer them now that ask them now that we're in suit.
And I agree
Frustrating.
I agree, as a fellow lawyer. Mr. Walsh is 100% correct, so.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating for me, whatever. I just have a little, we have a little bit more knowledge about this, because once it goes into suit, I don't want to interfere with strategy, where we're going, what we're doing, or
Okay.
make comments and stuff like that, and ask these gentlemen to assign what they might consider to be fault or not fault or whatever. It's just, you get into a really weird area.
Right.
And we don't want their statements to be used against us in a court of law.
So with that said, is there anything else that we can discuss about this tonight?
I would just like to ask just a couple of questions, if you don't mind. There seems to be two parts of this situation. One is the contamination, that's its own thing, in a certain limited area that we know about right now. And then the other portion is about whether people did their roles in removing a certain volume of the stuff, or whether more accumulated. Is that correct from the newspaper article that I read?
Correct.
I've not read the complaint, whatever. Where is this pile that people talk about, or certain residents call a mountain of stuff, or whatever? Where's that stuff located on that map, since I've not been down there?
Okay.
So there's
And-
supposed to be some pile that's been
Yeah.
growing
Yeah,
in
correct.
size.
So this dates back to 2013. There's a date on here, and behind it, these are aerial photographs. I think it's from 2015, 2016.
Okay.
So there was always a pile on site, and basically the material would be on this side of the pile.
Okay.
And all the processing, you can see even historically, and all the processing would recur on this side of the pile.
Okay.
So the pile currently, so the largest part of the pile, this part is still fairly low around the end, but the biggest part of the pile is this section over here, which borders Harvest, New England, behind the school buses,
Yep.
rises to about an elevation of, probably between 55 and 60. So this is the pile that our neighbors on Fairfield Beach Road could see out the back when they look out the creek.
And that's the area that's supposedly grown in size over the time?
Correct.
Okay. Do the other images that you have show what happened or what's
and-
happened over time?
And Brian can just flip those, and it's not the kind of thing you can see on an aerial. So
Okay.
once again, if you look
Yeah.
closely,
Yeah.
but one of the data points, and it was always a dynamic site. There was always a lot of stuff coming in, some stuff coming out. But one of the telltale signs was when we did the survey after the contractor left in January, where we could compare the pre-elevations to the post-elevations, that showed that it did increase in size. Julian provided us records, weekly tonnage reports of what came in and what came out, and if you compare those records to what we ended up with, they don't correspond. So that's another contention. that-
Shows, their records show more going out net, but yet our elevation's going up.
Correct. Yeah, they don't agree with the.
Okay. All right, that's it. I mean, I don't, that's,
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Let me go to
sorry.
Mr. Becker first.
You can go first.
All right, Mr.
Yeah,
DeWitt.
no.
The intent of the contract that we had was to remove materials, was it not? Right?
Correct, to
That's what
reduce-
this whole started, was we were going to hire someone, come in and remove materials, or bring in good
Correct.
stuff.
That was the
It was
objective.
to reduce the pile. That was the original intent.
Correct.
Just make sure.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Becker?
So, I can ask a question that's with the lawsuit on that, but the performance bonds, I'm more concerned that there are others out there that are having problems, because clearly from the articles and the write-ups, there's an issue. There's a lot of stuff circulating around what they had put up. So are we now going back on any other bonds that exist with any other vendors and making sure that everything that we have in place is good, and we'd be able to collect on them so that if we have an issue with anybody else, we don't run into this scenario?
Yes. We're doing two things. We sat down with purchasing as soon as this was identified as an issue. Did just what you suggested when it looked at any other bonds we had out there. But the second thing we did is go back and look at what our process was for evaluating how much of a bond do we need based on the work done to make sure that we had an appropriate level bond and to get our risk management group involved initially as part of the project. So we've frankly changed our purchasing protocols considerably to make sure that the issues that we had on this, we do not let happen again.
So enough, and that they're valid. And
Correct.
And then some sort of a process, so over time, we maybe check, like if it's a 3-year contract or something, that we
Make sure that they're
periodically.
appropriately reviewed on, or
Yeah.
renewed on an annual basis, whatever the requirement is of the bond. Absolutely.
Okay. When that's settled up, maybe providing a copy, if there's a policy or something, circulate it, it'd be helpful to see, but
We could do that.
thank you for
and
the
it
update.
might be appropriate if this board wishes to have our purchasing director, Gerald Foley, come through and talk about some of the procedures he's put in place.
Yeah, and maybe helpful with a new director in place as well. Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk to Mr. Mayor about that. Mr. Walsh?
The berm that I read about in some of your reports and things like that, that you're going to be trying to use some material in and whatever, is that at the bottom where that little inlet of water comes in? Is that to try to have some type of berm and then put some type of vegetative stuff on there to try to block the view for the
Correct.
Fairfield Beach Road neighbors?
Correct. Basically, a horseshoe on this side of the
Okay.
the property there.
And the thought is to try to use some of the clean material to try to build the berm
Correct.
and then put some type of vegetation on top of that.
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Going around again, any other questions? If not, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm glad we hired the law firm, and I think you guys are doing a good job with trying to manage this bad situation.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our agenda. I'll ask Mr. Mayor, or anyone have any further comments? Mr. Mayor,
No, that's
Anything?
it. Thank you very much. Good meeting.
anyone else? And can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Becker. We are adjourned. What?
No, I was going to vote to adjourn.
Okay. Mr. Mottola
I voted extra.
as a third. All right, thank you, everybody.
It was in further.